The 2021 Major League Baseball All-Star Game will be getting a new host city on Friday. MLB announcing it's moving the Midsummer Classic out of Atlanta's Truist Park in response to new voting legislation recently passed in Georgia. Max, I'll begin with you on this one. Do you agree or disagree with MLB moving the All-Star Game?
Absolutely agree. I applaud them, and I applaud Tony Clark for bringing it up in the first place, suggesting it as an idea. Look, the issue with the voting law, because you're going to hear plenty of spin about it, it's already out there. But actually, the problem is this. Let's start with this. There was no widespread voter fraud in the last election. It didn't exist. And so this is a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. So even if you say it's simply to appease voters who believe there was a problem, the idea of that problem, the specter of it, was raised by the losing side in order to try to undermine a free and fair election. And so if you're now appeasing those voters, even if the claim is, but it's toothless, it's not really doing that much to suppress the vote. That's pretty weak sauce, considering there was no problem in the first place and you created the impression that there was. Secondly, stringent voter ID laws in various states have been shown to suppress the vote of people of color disproportionately. And that's what we have here. Among the things in this law is more stringent voter ID. Now, is that exactly like a literacy test or something? No, it's not exactly like that. But we're talking about Georgia. We're talking about a state which fought for slavery during the Civil War. We are talking about an area of the country which during Reconstruction, after the war, when African-American men at least were entitled to vote, voter rolls were purged so that in some southern states, from the tens of thousands, it went just to the couple hundreds of eligible black voters, or not eligible, of black people who could actually vote. And that really took away African-American power in this country post-slavery. So that's the backdrop. The backdrop is in an area with a long history and a deep history, an insidious history of suppressing the black vote. Here comes an election because Georgia is now actually a blue state. Atlanta and counties with disproportionately African-American voters helped make it that way. And now in a state legislature where the state Senate is overwhelmingly one party, that party is further empowering itself and taking steps to suppress the vote under the guise of election integrity when there was enormous integrity in the last election. All this, and Stephen A., finally, I just want to say that many of the same people who say about Colin Kaepernick, for example, hey, you have the right to voice your opinion, you have the constitutional right, but then there could be economic repercussions, you know? Well, here, the Georgia legislature can do what they want, but then private companies and individuals are entitled to say, you know what, that's not for us. We're going to take our business elsewhere. And of course, now the next reaction is cries of cancel culture. And Stephen A., cancel culture is an issue for me. I don't think it's a good idea in many instances, but sometimes it's a very good idea. And this is one of those cases.
I don't disagree with a single word that you said. I completely support MLB moving the All-Star Game. But I will acknowledge that I sit here a bit disgusted because I think that there's another angle to look at, particularly when you're talking about us here on ESPN discussing this, because we are a sports network and we've seen the actions that leagues and the individuals playing in these respective leagues have been willing to take as it pertains to social justice issues and things of that nature over the last year or so. So let's take a couple of things into account, because essentially, I was watching Smirkanish on CNN Saturday morning. I think he does a hell of a job, and I was watching him with one of the Georgia officials. And obviously, I've been reading up on it, and the four things that I charted down, which Smirkanish had actually articulated thereafter. I read it first, and then I saw his show. He was talking about imposes new voter ID requirements for absentee ballots, empower state officials to take over local election boards, which I think is a very big deal. Obviously, the Secretary of State, you can ultimately be be replaced if they don't like, the results. They don't, or they deem you incompetent, or whatever the case, whatever excuse they can come up with to just alter personnel to some degree because they don't like a particular outcome. Limits use of ballot drop boxes. I think that's something that has to be discussed as well at some other point. And then they talked about making it a crime for the water and all of that other stuff, which is not entirely true when you listen to the Georgia officials break it down. And with the voter ID, even though I appreciate the point that you brought up, Max, on so many occasions and on a multitude of different issues, your ID is required in other areas. So it being required there, I'm not so sure that's that big of a deal to me. What's a bigger deal to me is obviously state officials being able to take over local elections and the Secretary of State being able to be replaced. But let me get to the bigger point that I have here. We're looking at Major League Baseball and we're applauding what they do. How many times, Molly and Max, did you see me come on the air last year and in the last few months when we were talking about violence on the part of police officers against unarmed black folks, Breonna Taylor and others, obviously George Floyd, Eric Garner, the list goes on, Philando Castile in Minnesota, all of this other stuff. We pointed to these things. And what did I religiously say? Time and time and time again. Rather than just take a knee, rather than protest to heighten the level of attention, think about the money that these players are earning. Think about the cachet it brings. Take into account Russell Westbrook clapping back at me the other day when he was like, it's not about, he's always a champion because he's a champion off the court. And he's talking about how, helping to build generational wealth and empower folks. Well, I pointed to those kind of things to say, then that means you have the power to influence legislation because that's where real change takes place. See, you got folks, right? Again, I'm a registered independent, even though I lean, I've only voted for one Republican in my life, but I have a lot of conservative views, particularly fiscally and unapologetically. So I can't stand the taxes that we have to pay in New York and California and stuff like that. Fair enough, but I'm a liberal in a lot of different ways. Here's the point, guys. When you look at it from that perspective, you got folks protesting. But what are the Republicans showing you they do? They go out and they influence legislation. So while everybody was making noise about what we didn't like and what needed to be changed, they were in the process of manipulating change legislatively. Now, obviously, Stacey Abrams and the crew in Atlanta and in Georgia, they got ample time to address this and to work around whatever they need to work around. So that's the good news. But the fact of the matter is it just shows you where we need to have our eyes on the ball in terms of using the cachet and the power that we have available to us to influence legislation, because that's where real change takes place. On far too many occasions, we talk about doing things, but we don't really hit it where it needs to be hit. Well, and that's that's doing so legislatively. You could talk about it being a blue state now because Ossoff and Warnock won their elections as Democrats.
You mentioned Stacey Abrams,
but Stacey Abrams is the real deal, no question about it. She's a future star. She's a star now. But the point is, none of that was able to stop this. Well, because they had the people in the State House to make it happen.
I would say, Stephen A., you're right. Local organizing is a very big thing, but gerrymandering is also a very big thing, and that's done intentionally to also, throughout history,
by both sides,
suppress African-American political power. Right. What's especially distasteful,
everyone's trying to manipulate
about what's happening. What's especially distasteful is that, once again, what's happening, and you brought up the Secretary of State could be removed, right? Like, why is in Georgia? Why is that significant? Because Raffensperger stood up to the president at the time, who was pressuring him to overturn a free and fair election because he didn't like the result based on untrue, false fraud charges, right? So the fact that this is now being appeased, that these kind of fraudulent fraud charges are being appeased is not good, but particularly when you can analyze and isolate instances where you say that will suppress, or at least is intended to suppress, the black vote.
And Commissioner Rob Manfred said this is the best way to demonstrate our values as a sport. And I think this is really big of Major League Baseball. It's something I definitely would have expected from the NBA, but not necessarily baseball. So really a step in the right direction. And I know LeBron James co-signed that, as he's also a part of the baseball family now as well with his association with the Red Sox.
Well, Molly,
there, fellas, when we come back here. Yep.
I said, Molly, the one thing, LeBron James is the one person that's is about the voting. He's about making a difference legislatively in a very conspicuous fashion, which is why he should be applauded. That's what all of the players and all of the leagues need to be doing, focusing on changing things legislatively.
Absolutely. More than a vote, Stephen A. All right, we'll leave it there. Guys, the national championship game is tonight. Dickie V, baby. He'll be joining us in a hot second. Gonzaga.